This story is based on verified judicial records and public archives. The occult beliefs mentioned remain hypotheses of human interpretation, never proven truths. The victims were real. Their suffering will never be glorified. A quiet mosque, lost in the heart of a London neighborhood. Behind its rough walls, the whisper of evening. Worshippers slowly left the prayer hall, leaving Imam Noor Walile alone under the flickering glow of fluorescent light. That night, something shifted. Walile wasn't a stranger, a theology student with a calm face and piercing eyes. To many, he represented the straight path, discipline and devotion. Yet beneath that facade lay an ancient fear, an inner chasm he would later describe as the burning breath of the devil. He uttered those words only once, during interrogation. In the silence of the mosque restroom, a boy from the congregation endured the unimaginable. The act was brief, brutal, senseless. Hours later, the child told his father, the imam said he heard Shaitan command him. It was the first crack in a scandal about to shatter an entire community. The elders confronted the imam. He did not deny it. He spoke of a presence on his shoulders, of an invisible mouth whispering into his right ear, of a nightly struggle between prayer and temptation. He closed the prayer room door, removed his rosary, and murmured, "I resisted, but he held me." Witnesses later recalled him appearing entranced, his face dripping with sweat, voice deep and trembling as he repeated the name of Allah like a shield that would not hold. To investigators, he was a cornered man, trapped in his own guilt. His crime, however, left no doubt. He had crossed an irreversible line while the walls of his mosque became the stage for an unspoken form of exorcism, a community casting out its own guide. Religious authorities soon learned that before the offense, Walile had delivered several disturbing sermons. He spoke of dreams in which a silhouette made of black smoke offered him a deal. In an audio tape seized by police, he described a demon angry at prayer and an inner war he could no longer conceal. His voice shook, hovering between confession and threat. "If I stay silent, it will possess me completely. If I speak, they'll cast me out." The elders chose the latter. They expelled him quietly, with cold resolve. By the next morning, the imam was gone. He had left for India. Some said to purify himself, others to flee. The case barely made the press, smothered by fear of scandal. Metropolitan Police records list a complaint, sworn statements, and a hasty departure, with no return. Later, a community investigator would admit what we saw in his eyes was pure terror, not the fear of a liar, but of a man convinced he had been crushed by something unseen. At this stage, it's vital to remember, the victim, a child, survived. He lives in anonymity, wrapped in silence. His story cannot be told through words, only through invisible scars. The blame belongs entirely to his aggressor. The beliefs mentioned explain nothing. They only reveal the twisted ways a man sometimes hides from his own darkness. In the psychiatric notes, experts mention a mix of religious delusion and dissociative disorder. Walile claimed to see shadows rising from the floor during evening prayers. He wrote down their names, drawn from the Quran but distorted. "Iblis follows me to the fountain," he wrote in shaky Arabic. One analyst concluded, he describes an external presence, but everything points to repressed guilt, transformed into a demonic projection. When the investigation ended, the mosque had to be purified. For several days, the call to prayer remained silent. The elders spoke of a heavy stillness, of thick air. An old man said he found in the imam's office a scorched piece of paper filled with interwoven verses and unintelligible words. A rough translation read, "Forgive me. He chose me as his shelter." Those fragments fueled the rumor of an unspoken pact between the imam and his inner devil. Scholars of Islamic folklore note that the idea of an intimate demon, twin spirit of a fallen believer, runs deep in ancient texts. It is known as the qarin, a twin spirit, mirror of one's darkest inclinations. Nothing supernatural in a literal sense. more a metaphor for the eternal struggle between faith and desire. But for Noor Walile, the qarin seemed to have taken form. According to some witnesses, on the eve of his departure, he told a follower, "When I sleep, he prays in my place." Then he reportedly smiled, a broken smile, caught between terror and surrender. Once again, the facts are real, the victim's still alive, and human justice alone determines guilt. Behind every mystical claim lies a concrete act, a suffering inflicted. Faith, whether invoked or faked, redeems nothing. Years later, a private investigator claimed to have traced him to a religious center in southern India. The man was said to be unrecognizable, bearded, silent, spending his days writing prayers but never reciting them aloud. Perhaps he was running from shame, or from that inner voice he once blamed for the worst. In a notebook found near his old pulpit, one faint line said it all. He no longer wanted to be a man, only a vessel for forgetting. The official file ends there. Yet, a cold impression lingers, that of a believer haunted more by guilt than by any real demon, and a community forced to accept that horror can hide behind the face of a spiritual guide. One last archival photo shows him before his flight, eyes lost toward the sky, lips pressed tight, the look of an exhausted man. One might think of possession, or simply the raw fear of a guilty soul. That night, the muezzin called to prayer louder than usual, as if to drown an echo clinging to the walls, and in the silence that followed, some swore they heard a faint breath slide between the tiles, a whisper barely audible. He fled me, but not entirely. The morning after his disappearance, the streets of London already seemed eager to erase his name. Yet behind the locked doors of the mosque, whispers lingered. Noor Walile represented more than a scandal. He raised a question no one dared speak aloud. How far can faith contain madness? Religious investigators began tracing the concept of the qarin, that companion spirit described in certain Islamic traditions. According to theologians, every human being is born with one, a spiritual double, mirror of one's desires, the shadow of hidden thought. For Walile, this figure had taken the shape of a tangible enemy, a living breath, a familiar devil. In his mind, that double broke away from him, gaining voice, intent, and command. Psychologists would later describe it as a process of dissociation born from the clash between the vow of purity and the drive toward transgression. One phrase keeps returning in his notes. He prays when I sleep. That sentence still chills investigators. It suggests that the boundary between himself and this other had dissolved. Man and demon had fused into a private stage, an intimate implosion disguised as possession. To understand that collapse, one must return to his past in India before his journey to London. The young Noor, the son of a Quranic teacher, witnessed ruqya sessions since childhood, healing prayers meant to drive away evil. At 8, he supposedly saw an old man convulse in rhythm with the recited verses. The trembling image imprinted itself deep within him. By 15, he wrote in a small journal that he wished to become the one who tames demons through holy words. Years later, that promise would come back like a reversed prophecy. Ruqya rituals rely on Quranic recitation to expel malignant influences. In some villages, these ceremonies blur the line between therapy and sacred theatre. Screams, convulsions, and tears become visible signs of invisible battles. During his trial in absentia, a theology expert explained, Noor may have mistaken the metaphor of evil for an entity so real that he yielded his own desires to it. The papers found in his London room contained pages mixing Quranic verses, symbols, and geometric shapes similar to taweez, small amulets of spiritual protection. Yet several inscriptions reversed the order of the scriptures, as if Walile had sought to turn the prayers back on themselves. Certain drawings resembled the protective seals of ancient Coptic grimoires. Others mirrored more alarming patterns, akin to magic squares once used by Syrian exorcists. No ritual was formally proven, though the gesture revealed a man slowly sliding from sacred text to the manipulation of symbols. Here, reality must be remembered. The victim, a child, still lives burdened by this trauma. Everything else remains the mental scaffolding of a criminal on the run. The beliefs he invoked were his own perception. No demon was ever proven. Responsibility lies with the man alone, with his impulses, his choices, his act. Witnesses from the mosque spoke of a strange breath during prayer, of a sudden chill. One young janitor recalled, "He prayed faster than anyone else, like he was trying to exhaust someone invisible facing him." To some it meant nothing, but theologians still debate whether it reflected mystical ecstasy or a psychological crisis. A psychiatrist interviewed for the BBC programme Faith and Crime said, "It's a mix of religious delusion and auditory hallucination, reinforced by the pressure of embodying moral perfection." Throughout history, the notion of possession has often served as a moral refuge against the inexplicable. Criminals who invoke the devil follow the same pattern. They externalize guilt by giving it a face. Walile had likely projected his own shame onto Shaitan, creating a mental distance between himself and the act he committed. For him, possession was no metaphor, it was an ontological justification. Sacred words allowed him to dress his instincts in the mask of evil. Researchers at the University of Sheffield found in his notebooks an obsessive reference, al-waswas al-khannas, the whispering demon, said in the Quran to breathe temptation into human hearts. Walile seemed to see in that verse the proof that his own inner voice came from elsewhere. Reading between the lines, one perceives the struggle of a broken man, torn between faith and desire. Each invocation feels like a cry toward a silent God. "Silence the one who speaks when I teach." That's the last sentence in his final notebook before fleeing India. Rumor claims that once he settled in an isolated madrasa in Kerala, he continued writing but no longer spoke. A student reportedly found sheets covered in reversed Arabic, forming perfectly symmetrical prayers. The result gave the impression of a shattered mirror, a prayer folded back upon itself. Scholars of religious linguistics saw the mark of severe mental disorder, inventing a language of substitution. Indian authorities never confirmed the identity of the silent monk reportedly seen in the hills. Yet, a local missionary mentioned that a foreigner would sometimes visit him at sunset, leaving fragments of black charcoal at his door like an offering. The image still chills, though no material evidence ties that scene to him. At this stage, it becomes clear that the story of Noor Walile belongs neither to pure folklore nor to ordinary crime reporting. It inhabits a twilight zone where the spiritual becomes the alibi of the human, where inner fear turns into demonic theatre. The entities he named exist through the minds that summon them. The danger lies less in the myth itself than in the emotional truth of the myth, powerful enough to swallow those who believe too deeply. The victims remain the only steady center of this story. Their pain is beyond myth, beyond metaphor. It defines the boundary between belief and responsibility. While Walile dissolved into visions, the child he destroyed had to rebuild life far from any metaphysical justification. The file closes with a final note from the chief inspector. The Walile case shows how human cruelty loves to disguise itself in faith. Moral evil does not come from the devil, but from those who invoke him as excuse. As the case fades, one phrase still echoes, almost prophetic. The devil often speaks through the mouths of those who pray the loudest. The curtain falls here, though a new shadow already forms for the next chapter. A domestic tragedy, an untrained exorcism, a family torn apart by the fear of the demonic in the English countryside. Step closer. The dark symbiosis continues.